The crystalline spires of Astrea Prime pierced the violet sky like ancient daggers, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 moons in rainbow cascades. Within the highest tower of the imperial palace, Princess Thera stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, her silvery skin catching the starlight as she pressed a hand against the transparent barrier. Below, the capital city sprawled in geometric precision, a testament to the Astrian Empire's power and order. Warriors in ceremonial armor patrolled the streets, their crystalline weapons glinting. Everything about her world spoke of strength, of power, of dominance, everything except her. Thera's reflection stared back at her, slender where Astrians should be muscular, gentle where they should be fierce. Her iridescent eyes, marked with the spiral patterns of royal birth, held a softness that her father, Emperor Valdrin, constantly condemned as weakness. Princess. The voice of her combat instructor, Karn, cut through her thoughts. Your presence is required in the war chamber. Thera turned, her silver robes flowing like liquid starlight. Another session to remind me of my inadequacies, Karn? The veteran warrior's face remained impassive, but his eyes held a hint of sympathy he would never voice. In a culture that prized martial prowess above all, Thera's inability to master combat had marked her as an embarrassment to the royal line. The war chamber echoed with her footsteps as she entered. Emperor Valdrin stood at the head of the obsidian table, his massive frame adorned with battle scars he wore as proudly as his crown. Around him, the Imperial Council sat in rigid attention, their ceremonial armor gleaming. Daughter, Valdrin's voice rumbled like distant thunder. The humans have made an interesting proposal. Thera's heart skipped. Earth, the young civilization that had surprised the galaxy with their rapid advancement and adaptability. While other ancient races had dismissed them, humans had proven remarkably resilient and innovative. They seek an alliance, Valdrin continued, his tone carrying a note of contempt. Through marriage. The implications hit Thera like a physical blow. She was to be the sacrifice, the weak link deemed expendable enough to send to these upstart humans. Her father couldn't have made his opinion of her worth clearer if he'd stated it outright. Commander James Barrett, one of the counselors, spoke, activating a hologram. The image showed a tall human male with sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold both strength and kindness. Their most decorated warrior diplomat. He has agreed to the union. Thera studied the human's face, wondering what he saw in her file. Did he know he was getting the Empire's greatest disappointment? Or had they hidden that fact behind diplomatic pleasantries? You leave tomorrow, Valdrin declared, not bothering to ask her opinion. Try not to embarrass us further among the humans. That night, as Thera packed her belongings, her hands trembled. She included the traditional texts, her mother's ceremonial dagger, though she could barely wield it, and a small crystal that held recordings of Astrian music. The rest, her drawings, her books of poetry, the things that had brought her comfort, she left behind. They had no place in a warrior culture, whether Astrian or human. The journey to Earth took 7 standard days. Thera spent them studying human culture, trying to understand these beings who had accomplished so much in so little time. Their history fascinated her. They had risen from primitive tools to starfaring civilization in a fraction of the time it had taken other races. They valued strength, yes, but also creativity, adaptability, and something they called emotional intelligence. When her ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Thera pressed against the viewport, watching the blue-green world grow larger. Clouds swirled across its surface like abstract art, and the sheer amount of water made her gasp. Astrea Prime was a world of crystals and stone. This planet looked alive. The landing pad was situated in what they called the Pacific Command Center. As Thera descended the ship's ramp, Earth's gravity pulled at her slightly stronger than home, another reminder of her displacement. A delegation waited below, and at their head stood Commander James Barrett. In person, he was even more imposing than his hologram, but it was his eyes that caught Thera's attention. They held neither the dismissive cruelty she knew from home nor the false diplomatic sweetness she expected. Instead, they watched her with genuine interest and something that looked almost like understanding. "Princess Thera," he stepped forward, offering a slight bow that managed to convey respect without subservience. "Welcome to Earth." She inclined her head in return, trying to keep her voice steady. "Commander Barrett. I am honored by your welcome." "James, please," he said, and his smile reached his eyes. "We're to be partners, after all. Shall we begin?" Dawn broke over the Pacific Command Center, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink that Thera had never seen on Astrea Prime. She stood on the balcony of her quarters, breathing in Earth's rich air, still adjusting to its unfamiliar scents after 2 weeks on this strange world. Movement in the training yard below caught her attention. James was already there, leading a group of soldiers through what he called morning exercises. Their movements flowed like water, nothing like the rigid combat forms of Astrean warriors. They moved in unison, yet each person's style held subtle differences, adaptations to their individual strengths. A knock at her door interrupted her observations. "Enter," she called, turning to find James himself in the doorway, fresh from training. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying its usual warmth. "Ready to begin?" Since her arrival, James had insisted on personally overseeing her integration into Earth's defense forces. Unlike her former instructors, he hadn't immediately thrust her into combat training. Instead, he'd started with something he called baseline assessment. Today, they met in a different facility, a quiet room with strange equipment lining the walls. Dr. Renata Torres, Earth's leading xenobiologist, waited for them inside. "Princess Thera," Dr. Torres smiled, gesturing to a chair equipped with sensors. "Please, sit. Today we're going to try something different." James leaned against the wall, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "We've been reviewing historical records of Astrean abilities," he explained. "Your people weren't always pure warriors. There are accounts of other gifts." Thera's heart quickened. She'd heard whispers of such things, but they were dismissed as myths on modern Astrea Prime. "What kinds of gifts?" "Mental abilities," Dr. Torres said, adjusting her instruments. "Telepathy, empathy, psychokinesis. The records suggest they were quite common before your culture's shift toward martial prowess." The implication stunned Thera. Could there be another kind of strength, one her people had forgotten? One she might possess? The tests began simply enough. Dr. Torres placed various objects before her, crystals, metals, organic materials, asking her to focus on them and describe what she felt. At first, Thera felt foolish, but James's encouraging presence helped her persist. Hours passed with little result until they brought out a particular crystal, similar to those used in Astrean weapons. As soon as it came near, Thera gasped. The crystal sang to her, its molecular structure dancing in her mind like a living constellation. "The readings," Dr. Torres breathed, staring at her instruments. "They're off the scale." James stepped closer, his expression intense. "What do you feel?" "Everything," Thera whispered. "I can see its patterns, its resonance. It's alive, in its way." She reached out, not with her hand but with her mind, and the crystal lifted from the table, spinning gently in the air. The discovery changed everything. Over the next weeks, Thera's training took on new dimensions. In the mornings, James taught her Earth's fluid combat styles, showing her how to use her smaller frame to her advantage. "Speed over power," he would say, demonstrating moves that turned an opponent's strength against them. But it was the afternoon sessions that truly transformed her. Dr. Torres helped her develop her newfound telepathic abilities, while James taught her to integrate them with physical combat. The crystal, it turned out, was just the beginning. She learned to sense emotions, to project her thoughts, to move objects with her mind. One evening, during a particularly intense training session, James attacked with a practice sword. Instead of dodging physically, Thera reached out with her mind, sensing his intentions before he moved. She sidestepped his strike with unprecedented grace, then used her telekinesis to pull his weapon from his grip. James laughed, a sound of pure delight. Magnificent. You're combining both disciplines naturally now. Thera smiled, realizing he was right. The movements that had once felt awkward now flowed smoothly, her physical and mental powers working in harmony. It doesn't feel like weakness anymore, she admitted. It never was weakness, James said softly. Your people forgot that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes the quiet ones, the gentle ones, carry the most power. That night, Thera wrote in her journal, a habit James had encouraged. She described her progress, but more importantly, she wrote about how she felt. For the first time in her life, she was discovering who she truly was, not who others wanted her to be. A communication from Astrea Prime arrived the next morning. Her father's face appeared on the screen, as imposing as ever. Report your progress, he demanded without preamble. Thera straightened, meeting his gaze with newfound confidence. The alliance proceeds well, father. Commander Barrett is an excellent instructor. You're learning combat? Skepticism dripped from his words. I'm learning many things, she replied carefully, choosing not to reveal her telepathic abilities yet. Something told her that knowledge needed to be protected until the right moment. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more before ending the transmission. Thera stood at the communication console long after his image faded, thinking about how different she felt from the trembling princess who had left Astrea Prime. Later that day, during a break in training, James found her in the garden, another Earth wonder she'd grown to love. Your father called, he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. He doesn't see me, Thera said, watching a butterfly dance between flowers. He never has. He looks for his kind of strength and misses everything else. James sat beside her on the bench. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are against others' expectations. But you're winning that battle, Thera. Every day. She turned to look at him, seeing the pride in his eyes, not the conditional approval she'd sought from her father, but genuine appreciation for who she was becoming. Something warm unfurled in her chest, something she wasn't quite ready to name. Tomorrow we'll start advanced combat integration, he said, standing. Your telepathic abilities are strong enough now to handle it. Ready to show the universe what real power looks like? Thera rose, feeling the energy flow through her, physical and mental, Earth and Astrea, warrior and telepath. Yes, she said simply. I'm ready. The diplomatic chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from Earth and Astrea Prime gathered for their monthly alliance review. Thera sat beside James, her silvery skin contrasting with the deep blue of her Earth-styled uniform. 3 months had passed since her arrival, and she'd grown comfortable in her role as bridge between their worlds. But today, something felt wrong. Her developed telepathic senses picked up undercurrents of hostility, flickers of thoughts carefully guarded. She reached for James's hand under the table, using their touch to focus her abilities, a technique they'd perfected during training. Danger, she projected into his mind. James's fingers tightened imperceptibly around hers, acknowledging the warning without visible reaction. Lord Vexer, her father's chief diplomat, stood to address the assembly. His crimson armor gleamed under the chamber lights, and his voice carried the characteristic Astrian authority. The Emperor is concerned about certain developments in this alliance. Thera's mental barriers strengthened instinctively. She'd kept her telepathic abilities secret from her people, knowing how they might react to powers that didn't fit their warrior ideology. What concerns? James asked, his tone diplomatic but firm. There are rumors, Vexer's eyes slid to Thera, that the princess has been engaging in unusual practices. Activities unbefitting an Astrian warrior. Several Earth officials shifted uncomfortably. They'd all witnessed Thura's unique combination of combat and telepathic abilities during training demonstrations. Many had come to respect and even admire her different approach to power. "I serve both our peoples in my own way," Thura stated, her voice clear and unwavering. The trembling princess who'd first arrived would have shrunk from this confrontation. But she wasn't that person anymore. Vexor's thoughts leaked through his mental shields, fragments of conspiracy, whispers of revolution, and something darker that made Thura's blood freeze. Before she could probe deeper, he slammed his mental walls back into place, eyeing her with sudden suspicion. The meeting concluded with formal pleasantries masking growing tensions. As the delegates filed out, Thura pulled James aside into a secure conference room. "There's more happening than they're saying," she began, pacing. "I caught fragments of Vexor's thoughts. Some faction on Astrea Prime is moving against my father, but they're also targeting Earth." James activated the room's security protocols. "Can you be more specific?" "They're using this alliance as cover for something bigger." Thura closed her eyes, sorting through the mental impressions she'd gathered. "They're smuggling weapons, but not normal ones. Something that affects both human and Astrean biology." "A bioweapon?" James's expression darkened. "We need to take this to command." But when they presented their concerns to Earth's military council, they met resistance. "With all due respect, Commander Barrett," General Richard said, "we can't act on telepathic impressions. We need concrete evidence." "My abilities have been thoroughly documented," Thura argued. "Dr. Torres can verify their accuracy." "And risk our alliance by accusing a high-ranking Astrean diplomat of treason," another council member scoffed. "Based on what? Feelings?" James stood, his authority filling the room. "Princess Thura's feelings have already prevented 3 potential security breaches. Her unique capabilities are an asset we'd be fools to ignore." The council remained skeptical, but agreed to increase security discreetly. It wasn't enough, Thura knew, but it was a start. That evening, she found James in their private training room, practicing with the modified crystal weapons they'd developed together. They combined Astrean technology with her telepathic abilities, creating tools that responded to both physical and mental commands. "They don't believe us," she said, picking up her own weapon. "Not yet." James moved into a sparring stance. "But we'll find proof. Your father's delegation is here for another week. Keep scanning them." They trained together, their movements synchronized through both physical practice and mental connection. Thura had grown to love these sessions, the harmony of body and mind, the way James challenged her to push beyond her limits without ever making her feel inadequate. "Something else is bothering you," he observed as they cooled down. Thura nodded. "Vexor's thoughts, there was something about my father. I think he might be in danger, but I don't know if he'd even listen to my warning." James sat beside her. "You've changed since you arrived, Thura. Grown stronger in ways your people never imagined. Maybe it's time to show them. They'll see it as a threat," she whispered. "Powers outside their understanding, wielded by the princess they deemed too weak to matter. Or they'll see it as salvation." James's hand found hers. "Your people's ancient texts spoke of these abilities. You're not an aberration, you're a restoration of what your race once was." Their eyes met, and Thura felt the now familiar surge of connection between them. Their months of training had forged a bond that went beyond mentor and student, beyond even their diplomatic marriage arrangement. In James, she'd found someone who saw her true strength, who helped her discover herself instead of trying to reshape her. A sudden mental scream shattered the moment. Thura gasped, doubling over as waves of agony hit her telepathic senses. "The delegation quarters," she managed to say. "Someone's dying." They raced through the facility, security alerts blaring. When they reached the diplomatic wing, they found chaos. An Astrian guard lay convulsing on the floor, his skin turned a sickly gray. "Don't touch him," Thera warned, extending her telepathic senses. "His mind, it's being torn apart. This is it, the weapon they're developing. They're testing it here." James was already calling for a medical team and containment protocols. "Can you help him?" Thera knelt beside the guard, careful not to make physical contact. She reached out with her mind, trying to shield him from whatever was attacking his neural pathways. The pain was excruciating, but she held on, creating a mental barrier around his consciousness. "Stay with me," she commanded, fighting to keep him alive until help arrived. "Focus on my voice, my mind. Don't let go." When the medical team finally reached them, Thera was drenched in sweat, her mental energies nearly depleted. But the guard was stable, his mind protected from total collapse. "Now we have proof," James said grimly, watching as the guard was rushed to quarantine. "And a witness, once he recovers." Thera stood on shaky legs, supported by James's steady presence. "We need to move fast," she said. "If they're bold enough to test their weapon here, they're ready to launch their real attack," James finished. "And we'll be ready to stop them." Looking at the chaos around them, Thera knew they'd crossed a threshold. The time for diplomatic pleasantries was over. War was coming, whether the Council believed it or not, and she would need every ounce of her unique strength to protect both her worlds. The emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence over Pacific Command Center. Thera bolted awake, her telepathic senses already reaching out to assess the threat. The fear and chaos flooding through the facility told her everything before the official announcement came. Multiple hostile ships detected entering Earth's atmosphere. "This is not a drill." She met James in the command center, where holographic displays showed 12 Astrian warships breaking through the cloud cover. Their design was familiar, but something about them felt wrong to her enhanced senses. "They're not official military vessels," she said, studying their energy signatures. "The configurations are slightly off. These are private ships, retrofitted for combat." James nodded grimly. Vexor's conspiracy revealing itself at last. "We've tracked similar ships heading for Astrea Prime." He turned to her, his eyes intense. "Your father's palace is under attack." Thera's heart clenched. Despite everything, Emperor Valdrin was still her father. The bioweapon? Probably. But thanks to the data we gathered from the guard's attack, Dr. Torres has developed a potential countermeasure. He gestured to a rack of modified crystal weapons, each humming with a unique frequency. "These should disrupt the weapon's neural effects, but they need your telepathic abilities to work properly." General Richards burst into the room, his face ashen. "They're broadcasting their demands. They want both Earth and Astrea Prime to surrender to their purified leadership. They're threatening to release their bioweapon into both atmospheres if we refuse." The command center erupted in urgent discussions, but Thera closed her eyes, extending her telepathic reach toward the nearest enemy ship. She pushed through layers of shielding until she found a familiar mental signature. "Vexor is on that ship," she announced, opening her eyes. "And he's not alone. There are others, Astrian nobles, military officers who oppose the alliance. They've merged our crystal technology with Earth's biological research to create something they think will cleanse both worlds of weakness." James was already mobilizing Earth's defense squadrons. "Can you link with our pilots? Give them your insights into Astrian ship vulnerabilities?" Thera nodded, but her mind was racing ahead. "We need to do more. The palace, my father doesn't know about my abilities. He'll be defenseless against their weapon." "You want to split our forces," James said, understanding immediately. "Earth's fleet here, while we take a strike team to Astrea Prime." "It's the only way," she insisted. "I can protect our team from the bioweapon, and maybe it's time my people saw what true strength looks like." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Thera established telepathic links with Earth's defensive squadrons, feeding them tactical information as they engaged the enemy ships. Meanwhile, she and James assembled a small team of specialists, each equipped with the modified crystal weapons. Their ship broke atmosphere just as the first explosions lit up the sky over Pacific Command. Thera struggled to maintain her mental connection with the Earth forces while preparing for what awaited them on Astrea Prime. James found her in the ship's observation deck, watching Earth shrink behind them. Having second thoughts? No, she said softly. For the first time, I know exactly who I am and what I need to do. She turned to him, silver tears glinting in her eyes. Thank you for helping me find that. He stepped closer, and the energy between them shifted. Without words, their minds touched, sharing everything they hadn't said aloud during their months together. The respect that had grown into admiration, the partnership that had blossomed into something deeper. When this is over, James began, but Thera pressed a finger to his lips. When this is over, we'll have time, she promised. Right now, we have worlds to save. The journey to Astrea Prime was tense. Reports from Earth confirmed their defensive strategy was working, the modified crystals successfully disrupting the bioweapons effects where it had been deployed. But the palace's communications had gone dark. They emerged from hyperspace to find Astrea Prime's orbital defenses in chaos. Rebel ships exchanged fire with loyal forces, while the capital city below blazed with weapons fire. The palace shields are down, their tactical officer reported. Multiple hostile signatures inside. Thera closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. Through the chaos and fear, she found her father's consciousness, weak but alive, trapped in the throne room with loyal guards. They're saving him for last, she said, her voice hard. They want him to witness everything he built crumbling before they kill him. James armed his crystal weapon. Then let's disappoint them. Their ship landed under heavy fire, but Thera's telepathic guidance helped them avoid the worst of it. The strike team moved through the palace corridors like shadows, their movements coordinated through her mental link. When they encountered the first group of rebels, Thera didn't hesitate. She combined her telepathic abilities with her combat training, anticipating their attacks before they came. Her crystal weapon sang in harmony with her mind, disrupting both their neural weapons and their conventional defenses. The throne room is ahead, she projected to the team. Vexor's there with his elite guard. They have the bioweapon primed. James squeezed her shoulder. Ready to show your father what real strength looks like. Thera smiled, feeling the power flow through her, not the brute force her people had worshipped, but something deeper, more fundamental. Let's rewrite Astrean history. The throne room doors exploded inward, and Princess Thera strode through the smoke, her Earth uniform gleaming, her crystal weapon blazing with telepathic energy. Vexor and his guards turned, their neural weapons ready. Emperor Valdrin, battered but unbowed, stared at his daughter with wide eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw something new in his gaze, uncertainty. Impossible, Vexor snarled. The weak princess returns to die with her father? Thera's laugh was like crystal chimes. No, Lord Vexor. I've returned to show you what true strength has always been. The battle that followed would be spoken of for generations on both worlds. The princess they had dismissed as weak moved like lightning, her moves flowing between physical combat and telepathic assault. Every neural weapon fired at her team was turned aside by her mental shields, while her crystal weapon systematically disabled the rebels' defenses. And through it all, Emperor Valdrin watched his daughter become something he had never imagined, not a warrior in the traditional Astrean sense, but a protector, a leader, a bridge between worlds and ways of thinking. When Vexor fell, his neural weapon shattering against Thera's defenses, the remaining rebels surrendered. The strike team secured the bioweapon canisters while James coordinated with Earth forces to contain the situation there. In the aftermath, Thera stood before her father's throne, her head held high. The alliance with Earth stands, Father. But it must be real this time, not just tolerance, but true understanding between our peoples. Valdrin descended the steps slowly, his eyes never leaving his daughter. You've changed, he said finally. I've grown, she corrected. Into who I was always meant to be. And as the twin sons of Astrea Prime sat outside the palace windows, a new chapter in the history of both worlds began, one written not in the language of dominance and submission, but in the more complex dialects of strength and wisdom, power and peace. A month after the failed rebellion, the Great Hall of Astrea Prime's palace hosted a ceremony unlike any in its history. The crystalline walls, once purely decorative, now pulsed with gentle telepathic energies, a demonstration of the ancient powers being reawakened among the Astrean people. Thera stood on the central platform, her ceremonial armor a fusion of Astrean crystal craft and earth engineering. Around her neck hung the Shadow Star, her people's highest honor, never before awarded to one deemed weak. The irony wasn't lost on her. The strength of our people, she addressed the assembled crowds, her voice carrying to both the physical audience and those connected through the telepathic network she'd helped establish, has never been just in our weapons or our warriors. It lives in our ability to grow, to change, to become more than what we once were. In the front row, Emperor Valdrin sat beside Earth's diplomatic delegation. The past month had transformed him almost as much as his daughter. The revelation of Astrean telepathic abilities, and their effectiveness in defeating Vexor's rebellion, had forced him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about power. The attempted genocide taught us all a valuable lesson, Thera continued. When we define strength too narrowly, we become weak. When we reject different forms of power, we become vulnerable. But when we embrace diversity, in abilities, in thinking, in ways of being, we become truly unstoppable. Her eyes found James in the crowd. He stood in his formal Earth uniform, proud and steady as always. Their bond had only grown stronger through the crisis, evolving into something that transcended both their original diplomatic arrangement and traditional notions of partnership. Today, we established the Joint Academy of Martial and Mental Arts, she announced. A place where humans and Astreans will train together, learning from each other's strengths. Where warriors will learn the power of the mind, and telepaths will master the skills of combat. Where no ability will be considered lesser, only different. The announcement was met with thunderous applause. Already, dozens of young Astreans had manifested telepathic abilities, once they knew to look for them. Dr. Torres had relocated temporarily to Astrea Prime, helping to identify and train these emerging talents while studying the phenomenon. After the ceremony, Thera found herself in the palace gardens, her father's private sanctuary, now transformed by Earth botanists into a blend of both worlds' flora. The crystalline trees sparkled among terrestrial roses, creating an ethereal beauty that symbolized everything she'd fought for. You've exceeded every expectation, Emperor Valdrin said, joining her by a fountain that flowed with shimmering water. Though perhaps I was looking for the wrong things all along. Thera touched one of the roses gently. We all were, Father. Sometimes strength wears a face we don't recognize at first. And sometimes it takes an outsider to help us see what was always there. He gestured to where James waited respectfully at the garden's edge. He is a remarkable human. He saw me, Thera said simply. Not as a weak princess or a failed warrior, but as someone with potential waiting to be discovered. He gave me the space to become myself. Valdrin nodded slowly. The diplomatic marriage arrangement is no longer necessary for our alliance. It has been secured through your actions, through the bonds you forged between our peoples. You are free to choose your own path. Thera smiled, knowing her father had given her one final gift, the right to make her own choice. She walked to where James stood, taking his hand openly before the Emperor. I choose this path, she said clearly. Not because of diplomacy or duty, but because together we're stronger than either of us could be alone. James squeezed her hand, and through their telepathic bond, she felt his love, pride, and unwavering support. "Partners," he said softly. "In all things." Their wedding, held 3 months later, broke every tradition of both worlds while somehow honoring them all. The ceremony combined Earth's vows of partnership with Astrian rituals of strength binding. But its most remarkable feature was the telepathic broadcast that allowed every citizen of both worlds to share in the moment, to feel the depth of connection between human and Astrian, warrior and telepath, strength and sensitivity. As they spoke their vows, Thera and James demonstrated the new forms they developed together, a dance of physical and mental powers, combat and consciousness intertwined. Their performance showed everyone watching that power could be beautiful, that strength could be gentle, that leadership could be compassionate. The Joint Academy opened its doors the following spring. Thera and James led it together, teaching new generations of humans and Astrians that true strength comes in countless forms. Under their guidance, the alliance between their worlds grew into something unprecedented, not just a political arrangement, but a genuine fusion of cultures and capabilities. On quiet evenings, they would often return to their private training room, moving through the forms they'd created together. Physical and mental energies danced around them, crystal weapons singing in harmony with telepathic frequencies. In these moments, Thera would remember the trembling princess who'd first arrived on Earth, searching for her place in the universe. "You're thinking about the past again," James would say, both aloud and through their bond. "About how far we've come," she'd reply, sending him images of everything they'd built together, the academy, the new understanding between their peoples, the love they'd found in each other. "And how far we'll go," he'd add, pulling her close as their energies merged, physical and mental, Earth and Astrea, strength and sensitivity creating something greater than either could achieve alone. The story of the weak princess who became a bridge between worlds would be told for generations. But those who knew Thera best understood that she had never truly been weak, she had simply been waiting for the right moment, the right partner, and the right understanding of strength to show the universe who she had always been meant to become. And in the end, that was the greatest transformation of all.